Hello, Packers fans. Welcome into PackersNews.com. I'm Kassidy, joined by Pete Dougherty here from Lambeau Field, where Pete, the nicest word for this win is going to be a drubbing. The Packers absolutely just drubbed the Vikings 41. What did they?
41-17.
41-17.
It wasn't that close.
It was not that close. In fact, it was 41-3 when the Packers pulled their defensive starters with over 9 minutes left to go in the game against the Minnesota Vikings, who have won. They had won 12 games coming into today. But, of course, as we said, 41-3 when they pulled their defensive starters. They got touchdowns from offense, defense, special teams. Every facet of the game went the Packers' way today. When Mason Crosby kicked a field goal at halftime that hit the bar and then jumped in, you kind of knew how the night was going for the Packers.
I mean, there's just it feels like they're just charmed right now. I mean, They're playing good football too, but it does feel like they're just charmed. I mean, when they were 4-8 and Rodgers had a rib injury, I mean, I wouldn't have bet a penny on them. And here they are. They're basically in the playoffs. You win next week, you play the week the following week. You lose it, that's it.
And there's a little bit of a caveat to that. I mean, the Vikings, the NFC's number one seed has not been locked up yet, but the Vikings, for all intents and purposes, have their berth as number one, number two, or I think the lowest they could go is number three.
Yeah.
The Lions are going to be coming in here in much the same position as the Packers.
Yeah.
You win and you're in. You don't, you go home. And so there was a point today where the Vikings sort of were like, okay, this game's over for us as well, because they didn't want to get their starters hurt going into the playoffs. That being said, take away the Vikings part of it. Did you see enough from this Packers team to feel like, okay, they've actually got some stuff figured out now?
Oh, yeah. It feels that way. Now, just as it was a mistake for those of us, speaking for myself and anyone who was in my camp who thought they had zero chance, you don't want to swing the other way and think, well, they're going to the Super Bowl. They're a really good team now. They don't get to carry over into these points for next week, but they do seem to have a lot of momentum. They seem to be, their defense has played better recently. Obviously, their offense is better with Christian Watson, Keyshawn Nixon. Those two guys had the biggest difference in this team. So they have some things going for them, and they have an experienced quarterback who's a very talented guy. So they've got some things going for them. I still am waiting for Rashawn Gary's injury to do them in, but because that was the backbreaker. I thought 4-8 was. No, Gary. There's just that's the coup de grace that did him. But they've played okay without him. So
Preston Smith has really stepped up.
He has, and now Hollins had that huge sack today. Yeah. I didn't see it, but somebody I think tweeted that Jefferson just broke wide open on that. Would have been a touchdown. But you get the sack, it doesn't matter. So a huge play there. It took him out of field goal, or took him back in field goal range, and they missed a field goal, right?
Yeah.
So. Just they made enough plays defensive with the pass rush to, they ended up winning and going away.
We've got a lot of questions coming in, so let's kind of jump into these. Let's start with this one from Steve. Kind of says it all. He says, Nixon for president. Pete, I'm not going to take too much of a victory lap here, but on our Green 19 podcast, I told Tom Silverstein and Ryan Wood that Keyshawn Nixon would have a return for a touchdown before the year was over.
Oh, yeah, no, you said that like 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
You're saying, one of these, he's going to break one of these.
Exactly.
Because remember last week was the one in 93 yards or 2 yards, whatever it was. Yeah, no, you've been saying that for 2 or 3 weeks.
He had an incredible hole. He came 5 yards out of the end zone. He had an incredible hole. So good blocking all around from the special teams. But then once he got to around midfield, that was all him. He just took it from there.
Yeah, he hits it up there so hard. It's very explosive. So, that big hole obviously is huge, but he got up there and threw it so fast that it was over. I'm sure a lot of kick returners would have had a really good return there. I don't know if everybody takes it to the house, though.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just a really explosive, fearless guy on those kickoff returns.
And on the flip side of that, while we're on the subject of special teams, the Vikings came in here with the returner who was second in the league behind only Nixon in total yards and average per return. And he had one big return, I think, that got him around to the 36-yard line. But other than that, this Packers special teams kind of swarmed him all night.
And I thought Crosby, who wasn't even going to do kickoffs because they activated Ahmed, and I don't know if you probably went in there for LaFleur, but Ahmed did, in fact, after inactives were turned in, pulled the groin muscle. So he scratched before the game even starts. I thought Crosby placed his kickoffs great. They were all at about the numbers or a hair over So that means you narrow the field quite a bit for your cover guys.
Take away the middle of the field.
Yeah, so I think he might have had 3 kickoffs in that area. That helps a lot because that was really good play. So it's funny going back to Nixon. LaFleur said that to start the second half, Nixon let the ball go and just let it go over his head in the end zone.
I think that's the first one he's had.
And LaFleur was like, I was shocked.
I can understand that.
Yeah.
While we're on the subject of Nixon, let's talk about his defensive effort as well. Karen asked, do you see Nixon staying just at kick returns, or do you think they will try him again at nickel next week? I want to provide a little bit of an update. Keyshawn Nixon said tonight that on Friday he didn't think he would be able to play today because of that groin injury. And then he woke up this morning, kind of felt how he felt, and texted the coaches of Ferrari and basically saying he was ready.
Quote?
Yeah, basically saying he was ready to go. That being said, we saw Darnell Savage get his starting spot back tonight. He turned it into a pick 6 that came off of a tip from Rasul Douglas. And then Rudy Ford, Ennis Gaines, both kind of used in rotation, and when they would go into dime as well.
Yeah.
Do you not? Usually, you say you don't risk a starter on special teams, but do you risk Nixon on defense?
Yeah, isn't that something?
Right.
Wow. And it's funny. I think that's a really good question because as Nixon was talking, that's the exact thing I was wondering. Asked him if he expected to go back to nickel next week, and he said, don't know. It's up to the coaches or whatever. Mm-hmm. I am tempted to agree with what you seem to be intimating there. Because yeah, and a groin injury, those are so easy to aggravate. All those snaps, you start getting fatigue. I'm just sticking him back there in the kicks and the punts, and that's probably it. Savage would move on. In base, he was safety. Most snaps are in nickel or dime, and in nickel and dime, he was playing slot corner. But he did okay. So I don't know if I had to put money down right now, I'd say they would do the same thing again next week against Detroit.
This is a very good question from Reba. It's kind of big picture, but I want to get your opinion on this. She asked, what has made the change over the last 4 games?
I think it's a lot of – there's a bunch of things involved, I'm sure. I think most of it comes down to number 9 and number 25. Mm-hmm. Number 9 has changed their offense, and just their defenses have to honor him. Plus, he's making plays. You got both of those elements. Tonight, you didn't get the playmaking. But they still had to honor him. They took some deep shots. The defense changes the way they play. That helps the run game. That helps, guys like Tunyon get open more. Mm-hmm. And then Nixon, that's just those swings, those special team swings. I mean, they go from having a punt block, 1st and goal on the 1. Looks like they're going to be down 7-0. Big win. They hold the field goal. And then
what a stop.
And then the kickoff is back into 7-3 before you can bat your eyes. All the momentum back with the Packers. Just like a couple games ago when he had the huge kickoff. Where his teammates mobbed him on the sidelines. What game was that? I can't even remember which game that was. 2 or 3 games ago, where they've been scored on. All the momentum was coming against him. Yeah, all the momentum. Right, it was right over here, and he has that kickoff to return to about the Rams 48, and it was like the Rams didn't even score. It was like the momentum just switched on a dime. So I still think, like if you want to make it real simple, the biggest thing is those 2 guys.
Alan Lazard was asked tonight about Keyshawn Nixon. Alan Lazard, was asked tonight what has been one of the biggest difference over the past 4 weeks, and he said Keyshawn Nixon.
That's what Aaron Rodgers said too. Yeah.
He said it's a completely different offense when you're starting from around the 40 than when you're starting from the 25.
Yeah.
And you can do so much more. You have so many more options there from the 40 than from the 25. And that's, golly, a 40 is like a short return, it feels like at this point for Nixon.
I think this is just a great lesson for all of us who follow this game and follow teams closely, is 1 or 2 guys can drastically change a team's season, and they can change it if they're in the draft class at the beginning of the year, or they can change it as we've seen this year, halfway through the year. And that you always have to remember that 1 or 2 guys can completely change the team. And
Pete, I would say it's a little bit of both of the things you just said, the draft class and just 1 or 2 guys that can turn around. Because you look at Keyshawn Nixon's not a rookie, so take him out of the equation. But look at who is really kind of stepping up and making a big difference. You still have your playmakers: Aaron Jones, AJ Dillon, Aaron Rodgers, Kenny Clark, Preston Smith. But look at the impact guys like Christian Watson, Kingsley Enagbare, Quay Walker, Devontae Wyatt, Romeo Dobbs, even to an extent. Zach Tom. Yes, that they have made.
He's been a godsend.
Exactly. Yeah. And being able to have those guys come in there and provide a little bit more breathing room, either make a huge game difference like Christian Watson, and Quay Walker, or provide a little bit more breathing room for these veterans.
So like Zach Tom tonight, Nyman went out after the second series. He had hurt his shoulder. He had re-injured his shoulder. He was cleared to go back in, and they said, if I think we're good enough, basically the floor said, I think we're good enough with Tom in there. Let's rest Nyman so he's good to go next week. And they weren't going to put him back in unless something else happened to somebody on the line. That's under different circumstances. If that's Royce Newman, they probably don't do that. And they probably have Nyman back out there.
Isn't that incredible to hear about a rookie in a must-win game?
Yeah.
Let's flip to the other side of the ball here for a second. We've gotten a lot of comments about this, but I'm just going to pop Craig's up because it kind of says it all. Alexander covering Jefferson was incredible. And it wasn't just Jair Alexander, just because of the way the defense they played tonight. But overall, this defense held Jefferson to one catch for 15 yards on 5 targets. That's incredible.
So, it just lays to waste the argument that, it's easy if you want one guy to follow a guy, it's easy for him, but it's a big problem for the rest of your guys on defense because they got to learn other stuff and other positions. Maybe not. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's not so hard, and it just tells you what a mistake they made in the first game. Mm-hmm. But at least they did learn from it, and I can't remember. I know I saw some tweets from ESPN about how many snaps he covered. It was like 60% of the snaps, something like that. 5. I don't know if all 5 targets were against Alexander. I don't think so, but 1 catch for 15 yards with Alexander on him, close to 2/3 of the snaps. Mm-hmm. That's. He did, man. He put his neck on the line. I'm not, I'm a lot braver than I am. I wouldn't say that about Justin Jefferson, but he lived to tell the tales after the game, yeah.
And, as we said, it wasn't just Jair. It was kind of a whole defensive effort because they passed Jefferson off a couple of times. Yeah. The only catch he had was in a soft zone where he didn't get picked up in the pass off. But that being said, I think it was early on in the game. It was still the first quarter. It was after the goal line stand, after the Keyshawn Nixon touchdown, when Kirk Cousins was trying to hit Justin Jefferson right down the sideline right here. You remember it was around probably 25, 30-yard line. Yep. And Jair was just in sticky coverage and broke it up and then hit the gritty on him. If they hit that, they're almost to the red zone. That's still early.
The gritty, is that what that was?
That was the gritty.
Okay.
That's Justin Jefferson's dance.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, that is.
I'm not hip on these things. So.
It's a TikTok dance from Fortnite. It's a video game.
Of course.
Yeah. It's what Justin Jefferson always does after he scores a touchdown. Okay. And
so he was mocking him.
He was mocking
mid-game, just like the Packers fans were. Fourth quarter, you probably saw that. Yeah, they were mocking the Vikings fan with the skull clap and chant. Yeah.
But all of that to say, that's still early enough in the game. The score's still close enough. If Cousins hits Jefferson on that, this is a different game possibly. And so for whatever Jair did or didn't do against Jefferson during the game, that play was huge.
It was. That would have been a 25, 30-yard play. And he just he had good coverage on him on some other plays. And was the pass to Jefferson the one that Douglas tipped? Or was that to the tight? Was that the Hutchinson? I can't remember now.
There were so many turnovers in this game. I'm losing count.
That's one of the things that I do wonder about is, how long can they keep turning teams over like this? Because, these things do happen in bunches, but it's hard. Not every quarterback's going to give you those chances. We saw, because Kirk Cousins is very – he's always has the possibility of getting really hot. And he can put up big numbers. But – he has his share of, real stinkers too, and I think today definitely fell in that category.
And the secondary talked this week about the turnovers, just to that point, and they were asked what has made the biggest difference. Through the first 9 games, they had 5 interceptions. So I'm not even looking at the fumbles. They had 5 interceptions through the first 9 games. Through the past, coming into tonight, over the past 6 games, they had 9 interceptions, and then they ended with 3 tonight.
Yes.
So over the past 7 games, they've had 12 interceptions. And when we asked the secondary this past week, what has made that difference, they all credited the pass rush and credited the guys up front, Preston Smith specifically, getting home, forcing those early and errant throws, and they've been able to take advantage.
They're getting just enough rush because there were some stretches where the Vikings were moving down the field, and and Cousins would have 2 or 3 plays in a row where there was no pressure on him at all. Mm-hmm. But then the next play, there'd be pressure, and his arm would get hit, and would end up floating up for grabs. And who had Amos had the interception, after they'd moved the ball down the field. And then, somebody hit his arm, and Amos catches the flutter balls. They're getting just enough rush to make a play that'll end a possession.
And to that point, that Amos interception came off of a TJ Slayton tip, and earlier there was a play down they were on goal to go, and TJ Slayton tipped a Kirk Cousins pass.
Yeah.
That it fluttered incomplete, and I believe that ended up being one of the missed field goals.
Was that the opening possession where they, after the block punt, I think, wasn't it? So
I'm trying to remember. It was early on.
Yeah, so that might have been
Mm-hmm.
the second down on goal to go, and so he knocked down the pass. They don't get it in on the next run, and they only get 3 points instead of 7. That was a huge swing. I'm not
that
positive.
That third down is when Slayton also pulled Cook down, and then Amos and Jair came in to help.
That was, like turning points. It's hard to say that turning point happened in the first 7 minutes of the game, but that was huge. That whole sequence, block punt, only 3, 7 the other way in a matter of like four or five plays. That was just a huge sequence.
I asked Rasul Douglas tonight, what was the moment you could look across the line at the Vikings players and know this game was over? And he said the goal line stand. As soon as we had that goal line stand, we knew it was over. And that, like you said, that was very early on in the game.
Yeah.
But after that, they knew there was no way the Vikings were coming back to win this tonight. Mohammed asked, did David Bakhtiari play tonight? Yes, he did. This is, again, first time that we've seen him back since his appendectomy. Kind of the same with the knee. Not much to talk about with Bakhtiari, but if you're a left tackle, that's probably a good thing.
Right. I only focused on him, 3 or 4 snaps probably the whole game.
Mm-hmm.
And he looked fine. I think he had, and I didn't notice him getting smoked for a sack or a hit, so that suggests he probably had a pretty good game. LaFleur said, and he was talking about the impact having him back is, and he just said, you got him and Jenkins on the left side. That's as good a left side as you're probably going to get in professional football. Their line, just the domino effect, their line does get a lot better. It does have me wondering, it all depends on what the medical staff thinks about his knee. But he's played well enough, and if this run keeps going and he doesn't have any more problems, what I would have guessed a month ago, as in his chances are 10 or 20% he's back. It could be well over 50% if this keeps going. But it all comes down to what the medical staff thinks about how much the knee will be a problem, if at all, next year after.
Let's put the cart before the horse here a little bit for our final question. Christopher says, might be our nemesis at San Francisco. They have to beat Detroit next week to make the playoffs, but if they do, likely going to San Francisco. I mean, to Christopher's point, is that another nemesis, or is this a chance to get a monkey off the back? I mean, San Francisco is so deep and so dominant, but still, is this the team on the rise?
Maybe I'd have to talk to some scouts about this, Buffalo in the conversation, for Kansas City in the conversation. But San Francisco, if you take quarterback out of it, might be the most talented team in the league.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the one thing that would be different this year, which I think San Francisco is the best team in the NFC, but they're down. They got a rookie playing quarterback who's never played in a playoff game, and the Packers would have a guy who's played in a lot of playoff games and is going to end up in the Hall of Fame. So, maybe this is the year where they're the most unlikely team to beat San Francisco out of all the Packers teams. Maybe this would be the year they would win. I mean, I wouldn't bet on them, but
everything else has gone their way.
Yeah, I mean, this game is the teams are so close. The margin, even between a good team and a really good team, isn't that big. So you never know.
And apparently San Francisco could have Jimmy G back in time for the playoffs. You almost wonder if they would rather stick with Purdy or go with Garoppolo.
Yeah, I'd feel, I'd wonder about putting him in just if he hadn't played at all, to put him in a playoff game. That'd be a hard decision for their coaching staff. Yeah,
as we said, getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Yeah. None of this matters if the Packers don't win next week versus the Lions. At this point, though, Pete, they've gotten all the outside help they needed. Six different games have gone their way, I believe.
It's incredible. I picked them to lose the last 2. All right, fine.
Packers fans might want you to pick them to lose next week.
No, okay. They're picking them to win next week. I mean, I give up,
I feel like fans are going to want you to pick them to lose. The fans can be a little superstitious, understandably so. Last thing, Pete, we saw Jair Alexander come into the locker room with one of those big hats on that have become sort of a thing in the NFL this year. He said he got it from Elton Jenkins. Our colleague Ryan Wood has said he would run this field shirtless if they make the playoffs. Can we get you a big hat if they beat San Francisco?
If they beat San Francisco,
we'll put the Packer News logo on it.
I would at least consider it if they beat San Francisco. That would be really big if that happened. Yeah. But like you said, first things first. I mean, they don't get to carry over any of these points. They got a game they got to win next week against a really scrappy, tough team that seems to really play for their coach.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to definitely. I said before this week that if I were Packers fans, I'd be more scared of the Lions than the Vikings.
Yeah,
so
I would be too.
Yeah, going to be an interesting one next week. But if anybody can make a big hat, put a Packer News logo on it. If they beat San Francisco, I'm going to make Pete do his entire Facebook Live in the big hat. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. We will have a Green 19 podcast for you first thing in the morning, and we will have full coverage for you. There are so many stories and things to talk about out of this game. So stay tuned to PackersNews.com for wall-to-wall coverage of the Packers' huge win over the Vikings, keeping their playoff hopes alive. Pete, thanks so much. Thanks, guys.